Hello, good morning. 5th of July, 11:08 a.m. Natasha N.K.O. reading from N.K.O. People of the Lie, beginning chapter 3, called The Encounter with Evil in Everyday Life. Chapter 3 has a number of subsections. The first one is called The Case of Roger and His Parents. Then it's The Case of Hartley and Sarah. Then it's Mental Illness and the Naming of Evil. Then The Case of the Voodoo Dream, and then the case of the spider phobia. So I'll start with the case of Roger. I'll start with chapter 3 and stop after the case of Roger. Chapter 3, the encounter with evil in everyday life. In the case of George, we considered a person who was not evil, but was in great danger of becoming so. Then, in the last chapter, to illustrate some of the principles involved, a couple was described who, for whatever reason, had crossed the line. Now I shall continue to describe others who are frankly evil. I shall also address the issue of healing those who, like Bobby, are their victims. Since I met the men and women and families I am describing in my practice of psychiatry, I am concerned that the reader will think, yes, but these are special cases. These people may be evil, but he is not talking about my kind of people, my colleagues, my acquaintances, my friends or relatives. There is a tendency among laypersons to think that people who see a psychiatrist are abnormal, that there is something radically different about them in comparison to the ordinary population. This is not so. Like it or not, the psychiatrist sees as much psychopathology at cocktail parties, conferences, and corporations as in her or his own office. I am not saying there are absolutely no differences between those who visit a psychiatrist and those who do not, but the differences are subtle and, as often as not, reflect unfavourably upon the normal population. The process of living is difficult and complex, even under the best of circumstances. We all have problems. Do people see a psychiatrist because their problems are greater than average, or because they possess greater courage and wisdom with which to face their problems more directly? Sometimes one reason is the motive, sometimes the other, sometimes both. While the data I am presenting are drawn from my psychiatric practice, most of the time I shall be speaking not so much about psychiatric patients as about human beings anywhere and everywhere. Indeed, the case of Bobby and his parents was truly unusual in only one respect, its relatively successful outcome. Bobby was fortunate that he did steal a car and attracted attention before he killed himself. It was fortunate that he had a relative who was willing to assume the burden of his care. And it was fortunate that through his parents' insurance there was the money to support his psychotherapy. Most victims of evil are not so lucky. But in other respects, Bobby's case was not unusual. Even in my small practice, I see a new set of parents like Bobby's every month or so. It is no different for other psychiatrists. We brush against evil not once or twice in a lifetime, but almost routinely as we come in contact with human crises. And it is my contention that the name of evil should have a definite place in our lexicon. It is true that there are very real dangers to such naming, and they will be discussed in the final chapter. But without the name, we will never clearly know what we are doing in such cases. We will remain limited in our capacity to help the victims of evil, and we will have no hope whatsoever of dealing with the evil ones themselves. For how can we heal that which we do not even dare study? While the reader may acknowledge that there was something evil about Bobby's parents, many laypersons may be inclined to feel that the case was an aberrant one. Just because I say that we brush up against evil with regularity does not make it a fact. After all, there can't be very many parents who give their children suicide weapons for Christmas. Therefore, I shall present a case of another 15-year-old boy who was both the identified patient and a victim of evil. The value of this more subtle case may lie precisely in its differences from Bobby's, for here we will be talking about a boy whose parents were well-to-do and who, while they demonstrated no apparent desire to literally kill him, seemed bent for whatever reason on killing his spirit. The case of Roger and his parents. At one point during my career, I held an administrative post in a government which generally precluded the practice of ongoing therapy. I did from time to time, however, see people for brief consultations. Often they were high-ranking political figures. One such was Mr. R., a wealthy lawyer on leave of absence from his firm while serving as a general counsel to a large federal department. It was June. Mr. R. had consulted me about his son, Roger, who had turned 15 the month before. Although Roger had been a good scholar in one of the suburban public schools, his marks had declined gradually but steadily throughout the 9th grade. In his end-of-the-year evaluation, the school guidance counsellor had told Mr. and Mrs. R. that Roger would be promoted to the 10th grade, but suggested a psychiatric evaluation to determine the cause of his academic decline. As was my custom, I saw Roger, the identified patient, first. He looked very much like an upper-class version of Bobby. Wearing a necktie and well-tailored clothes, he still had that gangly, awkward look of late pubescence. He was similarly non-verbal and kept his gaze on the floor. He did not pick at his hands, and I did not sense him to be depressed to the same degree as Bobby had been. But his eyes had the same lifeless quality. Roger was clearly not a happy boy. As with Bobby, I initially got nowhere talking with Roger. He didn't know why his grades were so poor. He wasn't aware that he was depressed. Everything in his life, he said, was all right. Finally, I decided to play a game I usually reserved for younger children. I picked up an ornamental vase from my desk. Supposing this was a magic bottle, I said, and if you rubbed it, a genie would appear who could grant you any 3 wishes you might want. Anything in the whole world. What would you ask for? A stereo, I guess. Good, I said. That was a smart thing to ask for. You've got 2 choices left, so I want you to think big. Don't worry if it seems impossible. Remember, this genie can do anything, so ask for what you really want the most. How about a motorbike? Roger asked without enthusiasm, but with somewhat less apathy than had shown up until then. He seemed to like the game, at least more than he'd liked anything thus far. Fine, I said, that's a great choice. But you've got only 1 left, so remember to think big. Go after what's really important. Well, I'd like to go to boarding school. I stared at Roger, caught by surprise. Suddenly, the level hand shifted to something real and personal. I mentally crossed my fingers. That's a very interesting choice, I commented. Could you tell me more about it? Nothing to tell, Roger mumbled. I suppose maybe you want to go away to school because you don't like the school you're in now, I suggested. My school's all right, Roger responded. I tried again. Maybe you need to get away from home, then. Maybe there's something at home that's bothering you. Home's all right, Roger said, but there seemed to be a hint of fear in his voice. Have you told your parents you want to go away to boarding school, I asked. Last fall, Roger's voice was almost a whisper. I bet that took a bit of courage. What did they say? They said no. Oh, why did they say that? I don't know. How did it make you feel when they said no? I queried. It's all right, Roger answered. I sensed we had gotten as far as we were likely to get in a single session. It would take a long time for Roger to develop sufficient trust in a therapist to really open up. I told him I was going to speak with his parents for a while, and afterward I would talk briefly with him again. Mr. and Mrs. R. were a handsome couple in their early 40s, articulate, impeccably dressed, obviously to the manner born. You're so kind to see us, Doctor, Mrs. R. said, genteelly removing her white gloves. You have an excellent reputation. I'm sure you must be very busy. I asked them to tell me how they perceived Roger's problem. Well, that's just why we've come to you, Doctor, Mr. R. said, smiling urbanely. We don't know how to perceive the problem. If we knew what was causing it, we could have taken appropriate action and wouldn't have needed to consult you. Quickly, easy, almost conversationally, fluidly alternating their responses, they outlined the background for me. Roger had had a lovely summer at tennis camp just before the beginning of the school year. There had been no changes in the family. He'd always been a normal child. The pregnancy was normal. The delivery was normal. No feeding problems during infancy. Toilet training was normal. Peer relations were normal. There was little tension in the home. They, the 2 of them, had a happy marriage. Of course, they had an occasional rare argument, but never in front of the children. Roger had a 10-year-old sister who was doing well in school. The 2 of them squabbled between themselves, of course, but nothing out of the ordinary. Of course, it must be difficult for Roger to be the older child, but then that didn't really explain things, did it? No. His falling grades was a mystery. It was a pleasure to interview people so intelligent and sophisticated that they answered my questions before I even asked them. Yet I felt vaguely uneasy. Although you don't know what's bothering Roger, I said, I'm sure you must have considered some possible explanations. We've wondered, of course, whether the school might not be right for him, Mrs. R responded, since he's always done well until now. I hesitate to think so. But after all, children do change, don't they? It may not be what he needs now. Yes, Mr. R contributed. We've given some thought to putting him in a nearby Catholic parochial school. It's right up the street and remarkably inexpensive. Are you Catholics? I inquired. No, Episcopalians, Mr. R answered. But we thought that Roger might benefit from the discipline of a parochial school. It's got a very fine reputation, Mrs. R added. Tell me, I asked, have you given any thought to the possibility of sending Roger away to boarding school? No, Mr. R replied. Of course we would, if it was something you recommended, Doctor, but it would be a costly solution, wouldn't it? It's outrageous what those schools are charging nowadays. There was a brief moment of silence. Roger told me he asked you last fall if he could go away to boarding school, I said. Did he? Mr. R looked blank for a second. You remember, dear, Mrs. R said, jumping in smoothly. We considered it quite seriously at the time. Certainly that's right, Mr. R agreed. When you asked whether we'd given thought to it, Doctor, I assumed you meant recently, since Roger's had this problem with his grades. Back then, we gave it considerable thought. I gather you decided against it. Mrs. R picked up the ball. Perhaps we're prejudiced on the subject, but both my husband and I feel that children shouldn't just be sent away from the home at a young age. So many children, I think, go to boarding school just because their parents don't want them. I think children do best when they're in a good, stable home. Don't you, Doctor? But perhaps we ought to reconsider it now, dear, if the doctor thinks it is advisable. Mr. R interjected. What do you think, Doctor? Do you think that Roger's problem would be solved if we sent him away to school? I was torn. I sensed there was something radically wrong with Mr. and Mrs. R, but it was subtle. How could they have forgotten that their son had asked to go away to boarding school? But then they claimed they did remember. It was a lie, I suspected, a cover-up. Yet I couldn't be sure. And so what? Should I build a whole case around such a little lie? I imagined there was something so wrong in the home that Roger desperately needed to get away from it, and this was why he sought boarding school. Still, that was just imagining. Roger wasn't telling me anything bad about home. On the surface, Mr. and Mrs. R were highly intelligent, concerned, responsible parents. I had a hunch that boarding school would be the healthiest place for Roger, but I had no proof of this. How could I justify it to his parents, particularly when they seemed so cost-conscious, despite their wealth? And why were they so cost-conscious? Certainly there was no way I could give them any guarantee that Roger's grades would improve, or that he would be any happier if he were away from home. Yet might it not somehow hurt him if I equivocated? I wished I could somehow be somewhere else. Well, asked Mr. R, waiting for my response. First of all, I said, I think Roger's depressed. I don't know why he's depressed. 15-year-olds usually aren't able to tell us why they're depressed, and it customarily takes us a good deal of time and work before we can find out. But his failing grades are a symptom of his depression, and his depression is a sign that something is not right. Some change does need to be made. It's not just going to go away. It's not something he's just going to grow out of. I think that the problem will get worse unless the right thing is done. Any questions so far? There were none. Next, I think it is quite likely sending Roger away to boarding school would be the right thing, or one of the right things, I continued, but there is no way at this point I can be sure. Most of what I have to go on is simply his own desire, yet that's a lot. In my experience, children this age do not make such requests lightly. Moreover, while they may not be able to express their reasons, they often have an instinctive sense of what is right for them. Roger still wants to go to boarding school 6 months after he first talked to you about it, and I think you should take his desire very seriously and respectfully. Any questions up to this point? Is there anything you don't understand? They said they understood. If you had to make a decision right at this moment, I concluded, I would tell you to go ahead and send him to boarding school. But I don't think you have to make that decision immediately. I think there's probably time to take a deeper look. Since I can't give you any firm guarantees at this point that Roger will do better in boarding school, and if you want to be more clear that it's the right thing to do, I suggest you take such a deeper look. As I explained to you over the phone when you first called, I only do brief consultations, so I wouldn't be able to help you further. Besides, I'm not the best person to do so. When we work with young teenagers who aren't in touch with their feelings, one of the best tools we have is psychological testing. What I would like to do is refer you and Roger to Dr. Marshall Levinson. He's a psychologist who not only does testing but specialises in the evaluation and psychotherapy of adolescents. Levinson, Mr. R queried. That's a Jewish name, isn't it? I looked at him, surprised. I don't know. I suppose so. Probably half the people in our business are Jewish. Why do you ask? No particular reason, Mr. R replied. I'm not prejudiced or anything. I was just curious. You say this man is a psychologist? Mrs. R asked. What are his credentials? I'm not sure I would trust Roger to someone who's not a psychiatrist. Dr. Levinson's credentials are impeccable, I said. He is as trustworthy as any psychiatrist. I would be happy to refer you to a psychiatrist if that is what you'd like, but I honestly don't know of one in the area whose judgment I would respect as much in this type of case. Furthermore, any psychiatrist would be likely to want to refer Roger to a psychologist, for testing anyway, since only psychologists do testing. Finally, I said, looking at Mr. R, psychologists' fees are a little less expensive than psychiatrists. Money is no object when it comes to one of our children, Mr. R responded. Oh, I'm sure that your Dr. Levinson is appropriate, Mrs. R said, beginning to put on her gloves. I wrote down Marshall Levinson's name and phone number on a prescription blank and gave it to Mr. R. If there are no more questions, I'll see Roger now, I said. Roger? Mr. R looked alarmed. What do you want to see Roger again for? I told him that after I saw you, I would meet with him again, I explained. I do that routinely with all adolescent patients. It gives me a chance to tell them what I've recommended. Mrs. R stood up. I'm afraid we need to go. We hadn't expected this would take so long. You've been very kind, Doctor, to give us so much of your time. She held out her gloved hand for me to shake. I took her hand, but as I did so, I looked her in the eye, saying, I need to see your son. It will take no more than a couple of minutes. Mr. R seemed in no hurry. Still sitting, he said. I don't see why you need to see Roger again. What business is it of his what you recommend? After all, it's our decision, isn't it? He's just a child. It is ultimately your decision, I acknowledged. You're the parents and you're the ones who pay the bills. But it's his life. He's the one who's most concerned with what goes on in here. I would tell him that my recommendation of boarding school and or Dr. Levinson is just a recommendation and that you are the ones who have to make the decision. In fact, I will tell him that you are in a better position to know him and what is best for him than I am. You've spent 15 years with him and I less than an hour. But he has a right to know what is happening to him, and assuming that you do take him to Dr. Levinson, it is only fair to explain to him what to expect. Not to do so would be rather inhumane, don't you think? Mrs. R looked at her husband. Let the doctor do what he thinks best, dear. We'll be even later for our engagement if we sit around discussing philosophical issues. So I did get to talk to Roger again, and I explained to him the gist of my recommendations. I also explained that if he did see Dr. Levinson, he would likely take some psychological tests. I told him that he should not be frightened of these. Almost everyone, I told him, experienced this testing as fun. Roger said it would be all right. He had no questions. At the end, instinctively, I did something slightly unusual. I gave him my card and told him he could call me if he needed to. He had a wallet and he put the card in it carefully. I called Marshall Levinson that night to let him know that I had referred Roger and his parents to him. I told him that I was not sure they would follow through. A month later, I met Marshall at a meeting and asked him about the case. He said that the parents had never gotten in touch with him. I was not terribly surprised. I assumed that I wouldn't hear of Roger again. I was wrong. It was at the end of January, 7 months later, that Mr. R called me for a second consultation. Roger's really done it this time, he said. The boy's got himself in serious trouble now. He told me that Roger's school principal was sending me a letter about the incident, which I should receive in a few days. We made an appointment for the following week. The letter arrived in the next afternoon's mail. It was from Sister Mary Rose, principal of the St. Thomas Aquinas High School in the suburb where the family lived. Dear Dr. Peck, when I advised Mr. and Mrs. R to seek psychiatric consultation for their son, they told me you had treated Roger previously and asked that I send you this report. Roger came to us this past fall from the local public school where his grades had been declining. He has not done well here academically either, earning only a C- average for the term. His social adjustment, however, has been excellent. He is well liked by both students and faculty. Particularly impressive has been his performance in our community affairs program. As part of his participation in this program, Roger elected to work with retarded children in the area during after-school hours. He not only demonstrated visible enthusiasm about this activity to me, but in their report his supervisors stressed his unusual empathy and dedication in working with the children. In fact, they even voted funding for him to attend a mental retardation conference in New York City over the Christmas holidays. The incident precipitating this letter occurred January 18th. On that afternoon, Roger and a classmate broke into the room of Father Jerome, an old retired priest who lives at the school, and stole a watch and several other personal belongings. Ordinarily, this would be a cause for dismissal from the school, and indeed the other boy involved has already been dismissed. The incident, however, seems to us distinctly out of character for Roger. Consequently, despite his serious academic underachievement, at a faculty meeting it was voted to retain Roger in our school, subject to confirmation from you that such would be in his best interests. Obviously, we like the young man a great deal and feel that we have something to offer him. One other piece of information that may be helpful to you. At the faculty meeting, several of his teachers commented that Roger seemed to them quite depressed after returning from his Christmas holidays, even before the incident in question. I am looking forward to hearing of your recommendations. Please do not hesitate to contact me if you desire further information. Sincerely, Mary Rose, OSC Principal. But I'm going to take a pause there at 22 minutes. Yeah, so I'm going to come back, finish this off. I'm going to end the video here. Thanks for listening. Oh, this is page 106, and there have been no notes. Thank you.